Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. Today's album review is on Siouxsie and the Banshees' 1980 album Kaleidoscope. This was the band's third album. For me, well, actually the second time they're being featured on the channel. I did review Peep Show, I think last month or a couple months ago, and I gave it a really good score. I gave it an 81 out of 100. It'd be hard pressed not to be in my top two, if not my lowest top three, when I go through their albums and review them with a little bit more. Uh, I wouldn't say more critiquing it, but it's always interesting when you go back and review albums in a different light 30, 40 years later. When some of these I haven't heard for maybe in full, maybe 10 or 15, 20 years. Um, Siouxsie and the Banshees was a big, important piece of my childhood. Um, Listening to Siouxsie and the Banshees and The Cure and Bauhaus and especially The Cure, like it fueled my interest in more moody, darker, more interesting, eerie, music. Especially in new wave. And I always tend to lean towards the more atmospheric, darker, um, more interesting. I feel like sound when it comes to some of these bands, and that's why I tend to not like Duran Duran as much as I would like, Depeche Mode or something like that. And Siouxsie and the Banshees was really important for me, getting a good foundation of liking darker, more atmospheric, and even Eastern music. And I always felt like Siouxsie and the Banshees always had like this like sort of a Eastern vibe with the way she dances and a lot of the percussion and stuff like that. It always kind of has like this belly dancer sort of Eastern sort of faraway place sound, and then so they were super important in my early life. I Probably the first song I heard from them was probably Dear Prudence when I was 7 years old. And then not long after, I remember my brother got Nocturne, the live album or live cassette back then, and it's still probably one of the best live albums I've ever heard. It's not recorded very well. If you guys know, there's quite a few times where her voice distorts, like "Sin in My Heart," and I think the other one is maybe Cascade or Painted Bird. There's a few times where her voice just distorts, and it's not recorded all that great. It's 1983, 82, whatever it is, and it is. But for as far as the emotion and the tracks that they have, and like, it's a fantastic live album, and I think it really captures the early part of their career very well. And it's funny when I listen to that album, and I really like those songs on that album. And then when I hear the other songs on the other albums back then, they're not so not they're not as good as Nocturne. I know Nocturne is kind of the best of probably their first four albums, but I tend to like the more atmospheric, albums, you know, Juju and Kissin' Dream House and On to Dazzle and of course Tinderbox and Peep Show. And but Kaleidoscope's where the I felt where the change was made, and them sort of embracing a little bit more of a futuristic, kind of getting out of the punk sound. When you think of like Red Light is a perfect example of the track on here where they're sort of embracing um, a more futuristic sound and trying to evolve. And I always really appreciated that about Siouxsie and the Banshees was I mean even if there's a couple songs off of Join Hands and Scream that I do like, when you factor in all the way up to Superstition, all the way up to even into Rapture in 1995, there's so much good Siouxsie and the Banshees material, and all their albums I feel like are really strong. Even though I don't necessarily like Scream or Joining Hands join hands very much. I mean, compared to the other ones, it's not like I don't like them, but I feel like Juju was the start of their evolution and towards what I like, anyways. And maybe that's part of the '80s. Maybe that's part of them embracing a little bit more atmosphere. But I also like the Budgies, um, Budgies drumming. It's becoming more tribal and more rhythmic and more interesting. And I always thought Steve Severin was a really strong bass player in his own right. John McGraw is a really strong guitar player for sure, and I really like when he does, kind of the odd sounds on his guitar, and they're sort of cascading, and it's not really like playing, but there's more like tones and shrieking and all kinds of interesting stuff, and it all complements Siouxsie's voice so well. And Siouxsie is an interesting singer for me because I don't think there's anybody that I've liked as much as her in my life as far as their music, and I don't feel connected to her voice. And it doesn't mean I don't like her voice. I think it's unique and great, but she's almost like a god figure. Like she's so almost untouchable, almost unrelatable, to where even when she sings like a pretty ballad or something like that, or does a beautiful performance with her unique voice, I feel like I'm not like. And I don't think it's because she's a female, because there's plenty of female voices where I do connect with when, and I could get a little bit emotional, or at least feel like I'm relating a little bit to, like Susan the Banshees is like reading a book. Like listening to her voice is like breaking out a mystery novel, and sort of like getting into it as a outsider, and not feeling totally comfortable, and not really relating. It's almost dreamlike. It's almost like, and I mean these in a good way, like with her voice, that I can't connect to it because it's so majestic and so powerful and so unique, and so it's just it's almost like I can't relate to it, and it's just like on a different like level, to where like she feels like a god or something like that, like in a strange way. And I don't mean that like I worship her like a god or something like that. It's just like her voice is so different, and it's just really hard to relate to in some ways. And I don't know how much of the songwriting she did. I know Steve Severin does a lot of the writing, and if he does, and she sings it, or I don't know what percentage he did, but man, it's just like if he did most of it, and she performed it like that, like that's one of the strongest connections that I can think about in the '80s when it comes to somebody else writing, and him sing and another person singing it, even another gender singing it. It's just like they're almost like, I don't know how much he wrote of it, but if he wrote like more than 50% of it, it's just like it's almost like they're joined at the hip, because like it sounds like how she would write. It's the lyrics kind of go perfectly with her unique singing, and I can't. When you combine the atmosphere of the tribal drumming, her vocal, the odd additions of some keyboards here and there, some screeching guitars, and you have this soup of amazing '80s music, post punk music, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like it started with Kaleidoscope, and I think that's what I thought of, like what album was I gonna do after Peep Show. I was like, oh, let me just go back to the beginning. But I feel like I want to do Kaleidoscope because um, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted to do Kaleidoscope because it starts in the '80s, and I'll go back and do Join Hands and Scream, soon anyways. So I mean, there's really some of the reviews of bands and stuff. I feel like I'm doing in a different order, and it is what it is. Trying to keep it a little different instead of just kind of go in order of from the oldest to the newest. I think I don't want to do that with every band. So I'm going to run through this album real fast. I pretty much said what I had to say about the band and the overall of the album, from a background perspective of mine. Um, yeah, I pretty much talked about that, and yeah, I mean, what I was gonna say about Nocturne was, I I, I love all the songs on Nocturne, and they're almost like they're just like embranded in my brain. But then when a couple of years later, in the later middle '80s, later '80s, when I got a chance to hear the albums they came from, they weren't. Probably by 85, 86, I was really into more electronic music, and I felt like that was the future. And when I heard Nocturne, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like Bauhaus. That's kind of darker. I do like a lot of the songs. They're really catchy, but it wasn't really having the atmosphere that I really liked. And then when I heard Dazzle and Tinderbox and Peep Show, then they really kind of blended in perfectly with what I was what I was looking for, anyways. And when I went back to Scream and Join the Hands, it was kind of like, I don't know. There's a little bit of me of Susie and the Banshees in the early days with like Helter Skelter and Arabian Nights and Hong Kong Garden that I feel like not that they're trying at all, because the punk scene was all about anybody could start a band, but I feel like I feel like it's just like not for me. And then could be just the essence of UK punk in 77, 78. It doesn't really do too much for me. Maybe because I didn't grow up, in it, but you know, all the bands from like 77 to 79 that are punk, Generation X and Stranglers and Buzzcocks and Sex Pistols and there's a big one I'm forgetting. But Clash, of course, too. But I consider Clash kind of like pop rock compared to some of the more punk stuff. There's a band I'm missing that's super important in the early '70s when it comes to later '70s when it comes to punk. But anyways, like yeah, I mean Buzzcocks is a perfect example. Stranglers, like I didn't really like Stranglers until maybe like '79, '80. I still need to get in more into Wire, The Fall, stuff like that. Sort of going into the post punk early '80s and stuff like that. There's a little bit I'm missing there, as far as my knowledge of. But there's something about the '80s, like when the recording techniques got better and they started adding more atmosphere and the keyboard started coming and maybe some use of drum machines, and it just kind of became more my music than some of the '70s music. I don't tend to like 2 minute songs, 3 minute songs, for the most part. It's kind of rare that I like a 2 minute song that's poppy. And it doesn't mean that it can't be perfect and be a 2 minute pop song. Like there's plenty of songs that are 2 minute songs that I like, but I don't prefer it. And when it's like punk music, it's like most of them are 2 minute songs, and it just becomes I just can't get into the music as much as I can when tracks are 5, 6, 7 minutes long, and I feel like I'm investing some time into like being taken somewhere. Like in a lot of ways, I always look to music as like an escape. Um, Not necessarily from an escape from what was going on in my life, because I really enjoyed my childhood, and I can't thank my parents enough for a great childhood and everything that happened in my childhood. I have no regrets. But like any kid, you want to escape into a book and something that doesn't seem like it's reality. And music was a big thing with that for me. So if I was going to listen to something that was deeper, like Susie and the Banshees at the time, versus something like Billy Idol or something like that, you can see that I wanted to be sort of taken to another place in a more unique way than just hearing a pop song or a punk song. And then also I think with punk music, it becomes a little bit like hip hop to me in some ways, where it's you when you're telling somebody, I wouldn't say you're yelling, even if you're yelling in punk music, but if you're telling somebody how you feel in your lyrics, and this is how it is, and it's right in your face, I feel like it doesn't give you the it doesn't give you the opportunity to really kind of sink into the track and really kind of come up with your own ideas because of what the music is, what the meaning of the lyrics are, because it's all in your face, right? It's like punk music is right in your face, telling you how it should be, and hip hop is right in your face, and it's telling you about the hip hop the rappers, whatever story he wants to tell, right? So it's like it's hard to deviate into another story or make it personal or kind of drift away when the lyrics are like right in your face, right? So the perfect balance for that is Siouxsie and the Banshees, right? For me, more atmospheric, more interesting drums, a unique voice, more melody than punk music, and some interesting sounds, and then you can kind of drift away and kind of come up with your own, idea of the lyrics and your own atmosphere and your own ambience with the track, right? So it's just on a deeper level. I just Siouxsie and the Banshees was so important for me to trans to being able to understand post punk, but also kind of take me into the later '80s and liking more atmospheric and darker music. So Siouxsie and the Banshees, I just can't say enough of. They were so important for me. So there's 11 tracks on here. Obviously, track number one, Happy House, is a classic. Um, it's my favorite track on the album right away. The vocals are eerie, sort of Eastern sounding. Again, with the tribal drumming with Budgie is great. I got it really close to 4 stars. Excellent track. I got it just one notch under there at excellent track, 3 3/4 stars. When I think about like the tracks on Nocturne and the early stuff, when I think of like four-star tracks, Happy House is really close. But for me, Painted Bird, Cascade, Spellbound, Night Shift, uh, even Sin in My Heart, Melt. I really like Fireworks. Um, there's a lot of 4 star tracks in Siouxsie and the Banshees catalog, but I don't feel like any track on this particular album warrants a excellent or a 4 star rating for me. But I think the album is really solid all the way through. Um, yeah, 3 3/4 stars for Happy House. I really like the moodiness and the eeriness also of Tenet, track number two. Really cool bass line as well from from Steve Severin. Excuse me. 3 1/4 stars. A trophy I like really a lot too, kind of balancing a little bit of minimal style with a little bit of pop direction in there. Has some nice changes in the song as well. 3 stars. My least favorite song is Hybrid. It's got a lack of direction on it. I feel like it's in a bridge of another song for the whole time. It just doesn't really evolve or really have much direction for me. I got it 1.5 star. I think it's okay though. I mean, it's in between okay and good. Clockface is kind of a short track. It's a little hard to. It's a little hard to rate 2 minute tracks, kind of like what I was saying with punk music. Although I will say with punk music, when you get what you get, and it's easy to rate whether you like it or not. I'll that much about punk and heavy metal and stuff that are kind of, I wouldn't say my favorite genres, but I'm interested in them and I do like some of it. When it comes to like heavy metal and like punk and some other styles, I can tell pretty quickly whether I like it or not. But there is a part of me that always feels like I gotta respect it for what it is, and just because it's not my style doesn't mean it's bad, right? So this is kind of a good example of that, where Cloudface, I really like the aggressiveness in here, but it doesn't really, it just doesn't have the opportunity to really evolve into anything. But I still got it as a good track. I got 2 1/4 stars. I think for what's there, it's a good track. If it was 4 minutes long, would it be any better rated? I don't know, but I feel like it could evolve into something, and I think it has all the opportunity there to be a 3 star track at least in my opinion. So I got a 2 1/4 stars. Lunar Camel I like a little bit better. 2 3/4 stars. Christine is obviously a early classic as well. In some respect, it's the second single on the album. Happy House being the first. Christina is one of the more complete songs, uh, especially of the last few on this album. Very Siouxsie sounding for the time. I mean, 1982. This is 1980, 82. This kind of early Nocturne period for me. I always kind of consider it like that period. Um, it's just vintage Siouxsie and the Banshees sound for me. I got 3 stars. Desert Kisses, a little bit more moody here, 2.5 stars. Um, Red Light, this is kind of like when I was listening to this again. It's been a while since I heard this album. It was like a thunderbolt out of nowhere. I was just like, wow, they're using some different and unique sounds on here, and doing some sort of panning with the stereo effects, and sort of like the sounds are kind of coming and going on different channels, and then it kind of has that interesting sound, and then it sort of has like the alarm sounding, or the red light blinking in the background, right? It's super cool track. It's kind of has a new romantic feel into it. It kind of I feel like it injects some energy into the band. Like, this is so much different than what the rest of the album, because of those sounds and everything like that. I feel like they're probably doing this album. They're like, we need something different, and the red light is that. Um, I almost felt like they went into the future on this track. Like, I gave it 3.25 stars. Also, 3.25 stars for Paradise Place, which is a really good track, which is on Nocturne. And then Skin, not bad. I give it 2 stars. So when I look at the overall of the album, I got 30.5 stars divided by 11, so 2.77. So I think that's pretty much balances to a score that I'm happy with on the overall album. That's 67 out of 100. Um, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite, but it's right on the cusp of the beginning. I know I like Tinderbox better. I know I like, obviously, Peep Show better. I like Dazzle better. I like Juju better. And I like Kiss in the Dream House better. But this is kind of the start of the ones that I like more. And so I would probably say Join Hands and Scream. We're probably in the low 60s. Superstition would probably be in the middle 60s. There are some really songs that I like on Superstition, but there's some ones where they're trying too hard. So that's going to be an interesting album to rate. And I think Rapture is very underrated, although it's very long. There's some heavy tracks on there, like Double Dare and Love Out of Me, and I mean, there's some powerful tracks on there. The title song Rapture, or not Rapture, is it? Yeah, Rapture, which reminds me of Rhapsody from Peep Show. Like, there's some really good songs on Rapture, and it combines with, I think, some decent pop songs with, Stargazer and Oh Baby, and there's some good tracks on there. I feel like that one might be a little bit underrated in their catalog because it's the '90s. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts on Kaleidoscope. I do really like this album. Um, if it took off Hybrid and maybe Skin and went down to 9 tracks and maybe added one more unique song like Red Light, I think it has all the bones there to be a more complete album. Um, it's interesting because, I mean, everything's in retrospect, but you wonder sometimes how often a band. I know back in the '80s they take like maybe a month at the tops to record an album. Some bands would record them in like 2-3 weeks, especially in the early '80s. And then towards the later '80s, just too many options, and too many recording options, and too many interesting options and for sound, and the recording process ends up taking 6 months to a year as the later '80s and early '90s started. But back in these days, I mean, 4 weeks in a studio, and so you wonder. I mean, it have to. I mean, every artist would, do the album and then be like, oh man, I wish I had another week or two to really like put in a couple more tracks and complete this, right? Or do you have the thought process of that is, what we were feeling at the time. Let's not overthink it. Let's put it out because we're going to make another album in 6 months after we tour again, right? So in that retrospect, it's kind of cool because you're getting a lot more output, a lot more music. Um, But when you want to like listen to an album and be like, "Ooh, it's so close to being like really, really good," but it's just quite not there, and a lot of that could be because they're rushing so much stuff into one album, and you know, I would imagine if they let this sink in for a couple months and then came back with a couple more tracks and figured out whichever ones they thought were better. I mean, this album could be in the upper echelon. Um, you know, and that's the thing with Siouxsie and the Banshees. When you think about it, there's really no like disintegration album like from The Cure. There's no definitive Siouxsie and the Banshees album in my opinion. Some will say The Scream because it's the first. I mean, that's obvious to say that because you know, like a lot of bands, especially in the later '70s and early '80s, the first album is always looked at very fondly. And you know, hardcore Siouxsie and the Banshees, ones that've been around since '78, they're gonna be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, Siouxsie and the Banshees, they were the best, they were the most pure then in '78, and that was what they sounded like, and that's what I got used to sounding like. And then by Peep Show or Tinderbox, they're just whatever. You know what I mean? They're a '80s band now. I kind of think the opposite, but I can see how people are like that. I mean, there's some bands where you think like their first period is the best, but I think Siouxsie and the Banshees grew really well and was consistent through it. That's my thoughts on Siouxsie and the Banshees, but um, I don't think Siouxsie and the Banshees really have a definitive album that like you know, and that's why I think Nocturne is the definitive album for Siouxsie and the Banshees. And I'll say that even though I like Peep Show and Tinderbox and Dazzle are probably my top three Siouxsie and the Banshees albums. But I can say Nocturne is probably their definitive album because it doesn't have so much out music on Scream. In fact, maybe the Voodoo song, I always forget, the Voodoo Child or Voodoo Dolly, whatever it is. I can't remember if that one's off the first two albums, but you know, well, I'm curious. Let me see if I always forget if any songs are off the first two albums are on. Um, I guess Helter Skelter. Well, is Helter Skelter on that or Switch? Maybe it's just Switch. I'm blanking on my Nocturne track list. I know some of my favorite ones aren't on there. Of course, my computer's acting slow here. Join Hands. Playground Twist might be on there, maybe. All right, so let me go here. Nocturne. Uh, yeah, Nocturne has Switch on it, and Helter Skelter. Voodoo Dolly, I can't remember where Voodoo Dolly is from. That must be from Juju. So it has Switch on there. Yeah. So and Helter Skelter, right? So those are the only two that are old. Uh, right, Helter Skelter. I'm blanking on what I just saw on the other. Maybe Helter Skelter was not okay. Yeah, Helter Skelter's on the first album. So Helter Skelter and Switch are the only two songs off the first two albums on Nocturne. You know, it doesn't mean that's bad or good. I'm just saying it. Like Nocturne feels like the best album in there, but it's still sort of the collection of Kaleidoscope, Juju, and Kiss in the Dream House, and in fact even more so Juju and Kiss in the Dream House because on Kaleidoscope there's only Happy House, Paradise Place on there, right? So not even Christine's on there. But ooh, thought I stopped recording there for a second. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on Siouxsie and the Banshees' third album, Kaleidoscope. Um, Curious what your thoughts are on Kaleidoscope. Um, where would you think it ranks in the Siouxsie and the Banshees catalog? I guess they have two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. I guess they have 10 albums. I don't consider their '80s Wheels on Fire '87 album I don't consider that an album because it's all great. It's all cover songs. So blank on that one. I think there's 10 songs. So where would you think Kaleidoscope ranks in the top 10 Susan Banshee song albums? For me, without knowing, without really like looking at checklist, I'd probably say somewhere around seven or eight favorite Susan Banshee song, and I gave it a 67. So you can see how, which is on the high side of good. It's almost very good. It's right on the edge. It's a song away. I mean, I could probably give it a couple extra points for sure for what it is and bump it up to a 70 as it is. But I feel like there's really needs a couple more supporting songs or maybe a couple lead songs that's as good as Happy House. Um, I think it would have been there, but you can see how strong their catalog is if I'm getting their seventh album out of 10, or this album probably ranking it from around 7 or 8, and I'm giving it a 67. So I think very highly of their catalog. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Kaleidoscope. All right, thanks for watching.